Last week, I was talking about our complicated, our ambivalent ideas about the way we think of our body. Is the body me? Is the body something else? Is the body my possession? Is the brain me? Am I in my head? And that we shift between treating my body as me or not me or partly me during the course of a day, during the course of a week, during the course of our lives. But that really, it's equally complicated if we're just thinking about the mind, if we're just thinking about me, myself. What on earth is this? And I started asking the question as well, if I get to 11 o'clock in the morning and I feel I need a cup of coffee or I want a cup of coffee, do I actually just want it or do I need it? What do I mean by that? If I want it, it's my free choice. There's nothing else, just me deciding whether I want this cup of coffee. If I need a cup of coffee, then there's something else getting in the way of my free choice. Now, I can see that my body as being not me, as the thing that's making me need this coffee. Or I can see the fact that I've been up for 24 hours straight and I desperately need a hit of caffeine or something. Circumstance is the outside world. But what is the me bit? What's the self bit? And traditionally, those kind of answers were, we look for the bit which isn't influenced. We look for the bit which is just its own thing, separate. And traditionally in the West, we might think of that as being my eternal soul, something that is of God. That'll see me right. Or within the India of Shakyamuni Buddha's day, the idea of Brahman, this universal creative energy, life force, of which I am a fragment. Atman, self in that sense. And because Brahman is eternal, unchanging, this Atman, this spark of that divine life, divine fire that is me, is itself unchanging, eternal. Or we can take the whole kind of divine thing out of it. We can say, no, it's consciousness. It's my consciousness, or even just consciousness itself. The world presents itself in so many different ways. I have so many different thoughts. And yet underlying there must be this me, this true me, which I can see as linked to all other beings in some kind of universal consciousness, or I can see, this is the heart of me, this is the substance of me, this is the truth of me, universal, unchanging. And of course the Buddha's great innovation, great thought, great insight, understanding, which Buddhism itself has always tried to find ways of backing off from and going, no, it didn't actually mean that, is that there is no eternal, no unchanging, no self in that very specific sense. All is change, all is flux. And yet, I still feel like me. I absolutely feel like me. And that sense continues. And I think, well, of course I can remember yesterday, I can remember the day before, I can think about the future. Of course, there's the real continuity of me, and most of our Western philosophy and our Western thought and our everyday assumptions are about, well, of course it's the same me. And Buddhism tends to say, no, there is nothing that holds all these disparate perceptions, sensations, thoughts, forms. Nothing that holds it all together. So we have the idea of this, the five skandhas, these aggregates, these heaps, and samskaras, the mental formations, all of which are not self, not personal. And so we're left with, well, actually there's a really nice image for this. It's the image of how we see. We see the world as a whole. We see it as complete. And yet, of course, basic biology. In the middle of the retina at the back of the eye, the optic nerve gathers all the fibres together, and there's a blimmin' hole. There's this big hole in each of our eye's vision. We don't see the whole. We just see a complete image, despite the gap, despite the incompletion of it. And in a sense, isn't the self a bit like that? Well, yeah, it's actually quite a nice image. It just whenever we think, well, this is just the way things are. Of course this is reality. Of course this is natural. Well, maybe, maybe not. We're actually constructing it in each moment different ways. Which is great as far as it goes, but what is happening here? How does this process work? Can we have a better kind of image of what it is to be a self? How this sense of me arises? How this self operates? Well, I think, and it's somebody Barry's talked about quite a lot. It crops up in his books. And this is the psychologist and psychoanalyst Philip Bromberg. Really interesting guy, died in 2020, so not very long ago. Wrote 3 fabulous books about his clinical experience as an analyst. Wasn't given to great overarching theories or kind of metaphysics of psychoanalysis or anything. But starting from this intimate experience of, well, actually he's one of the founders of what we think about as relational psychoanalysis, that actually at the heart of that practice, that process is relationship. 2 people coming together into the same space, and what happens between them, what they do together, is the important part, rather than, in our conventional way of thinking about things, one of them knowing, one of them needing to be known, one of them being in a position of control, one of them being in a position of being controlled, one of them having the truth, one of them having to learn the truth. That rather, it's relationship, it's process. We experience together, and that changes things. That changes how we are in the world. And actually that immediately begins to sound, a little bit more like Zen. So I'm going to read you 2 bits. I'm going to read you one, this wonderfully concise statement from Bromberg's second book, Awakening the Dreamer. It's just a little paragraph. It says, oh yeah, this is how it is. Yeah, oh fine, great. Go away, we know all now. Except of course we don't, because what on earth does that mean? And then this wonderful image. Because images are important, like this image of the eyeball in its blind spot. Images help us think. So, this is from chapter 1 of Awakening the Dreamer, second book. Very good. They're wonderful books. Do we need to go rush off and read them all? No, absolutely not. They're really interesting. They're fascinating. In a sense, all we need to know, or is that what's useful to us, and what's useful to us is this idea of, well, actually, Let's find out. To reprise, self-states are what the mind comprises. Dissociation is what the mind does. The relationship between self-states and dissociation is what the mind is. It's the stability of that relationship that enables a person to experience continuity as I. A flexible relationship amongst self-states through the use of ordinary dissociation is what allows a human being to engage the ever-shifting requirements of life's complexities with creativity and spontaneity. It's what gives a person the remarkable capacity to negotiate character and change simultaneously, to stay the same while changing. And it's this relationship that determines what is meant when we speak of conscious and unconscious. Conscious and unconscious. And we're used to thinking of the mind maybe as the bit we see and then this completely other thing which acts and influences and has its own processes, the whole kind of Freud mega theories. How does Bromberg begin to ask us to understand this? Suggesting, well, maybe there is no sharp distinction between conscious and unconscious. Maybe we don't need to think of different processes or different realms. Saying, actually, he found in Hippolyte Taine, the 19th century French philosopher and literary historian, just an image, little paragraph of what Taine says. So just listen, this is the picture, this is the image, which is in a sense all we need. One can compare the mind of a man to a theatre of indefinite depth. So we've got a stage, indefinite depth. We can't see how deep the stage goes back. Whose apron is very narrow, so that's the little lighted up bit at the front, the bit you can really see clearly, spotlights on, but whose stage becomes larger away from the apron. Also, it doesn't narrow down as it goes back, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. On this lighted apron, there is room for one actor only. He enters, gestures for a moment, and leaves. Another arrives, then another, and so on. Among the scenery, and far off, backstage, there are multitudes of obscure forms, whom a summons can bring onto the stage. And unknown evolutions take place incessantly among this crowd of actors. So we've got this vast cast of characters. Some of them we can kind of just glimpse in the background somewhere. See them, they're talking away, doing whatever they're doing. And then somebody comes forward. And that's the me. That's the I in this moment. And in another moment, another character steps forward. This is Bromberg's basic idea of self-states. Self-states are complete. They're wholes. So rather than thinking of the whole as the universal, Brahman or God, these are little holes. This whole, this complete thing in this moment, that's me. And it's self-aware, it's self-consistent. It can give you an account of itself. It has a personality. It has memories. And yet, this character leaves, another one comes along, which is the same but different. Sort of like one you've seen before and sort of not. And then that character leaves too and another comes along. This is what he's saying when self-states are what the mind comprises, this cast of our characters. But what's happening as one leaves, one disappears? This is where the dissociation comes in, the taking apart. Dissociate. We can talk about different kinds of dissociation at work with self-states, and in a sense, our experience in meditation is very much this. I'm here, I'm present, I'm aware, and then I'm here, I'm present, I'm aware, but hang on, where was I just now? What was actually going on between there and here? And when I've come back, when we said meditation is, Zazen is all about coming back, all about returning over and over again. I was somewhere and now I'm back. And in a sense, this is just what being a self is. The point being that it's quite likely not quite the same me that's here as was here a moment ago. And obviously in one period of Zazen, there's probably no great differences. Or maybe there are. Maybe I discover in one moment that my life is meaningless and 5 minutes later I'm back and I'm just me. The point about these self-states is they always feel like just me, whether it's the just me of absolute despair or the just me of total euphoria or the just me of just sitting here. It always feels exactly like me because I'm here and then there's this dissociation, this zooming out, fading out to be nothing in particular, but open and receptive, and then it's this bringing together of these self-states, almost like making a string to thread them on. Gaps of dissociation in between, that I make a kind of consistent me. I tell stories about me. As I say, each of these are whole. They're almost like personalities, sub-personalities. And if you think of what we used to call multiple personality, or something like that, they're literally behaving, feeling, perceiving, acting as entirely different people. Alter egos. It's not that, but it's not unlike that. In a sense, it's not that either. It's just that, we're close enough so you don't really see the gaps. And we certainly aren't aware of the gaps. So out of this discontinuous, dissociated me, we create a whole, which is a story. It's made up, it irons out the gaps, smooths over the differences. But it's a me, it's a whole. Who comes forward now to speak, to gesture? Who's disappearing backwards? Who's milling around behind? Well, this is where the second kind of dissociation comes in. That being me and having grown up in a particular way, particular family, particular society, there are places I'm only too eager to go. There are memories I'm only too eager to have. And there are other places I don't want to go, other things I don't want to remember. And maybe I push them completely out, or maybe I can kind of see them grinning at me from the sides. At any given moment, I'll be bringing to awareness, bringing to consciousness, the self-state which offers me the best fit for that, the best fit for this moment. So if, take a pretty common theme these days, I've got elderly relatives, difficulties about dementia, whatever. I can't really get on with my life if I'm taking the dreadfulness, the awfulness of that totally in front of me the whole time. I need push it apart. Bromberg talks about there are situations where, fear is just not appropriate. If we can, we'll find a self-state which appears brave, because the self-states which do acknowledge fear, we've pushed them away. Now, of course, bravery is in itself a problem. It's great some other time, but then to pretend that we're never afraid, that would be ridiculous. And the problem becomes when we stop being very good at moving, navigating between these different self-states. Let's hope that this is the next bit I want to read. Who knows? Let's find out. Yeah, okay. At any given moment, subjective consciousness, that's the I bit, the me, adheres to whatever self-configuration is present, because the natural hypnoid capacity of the mind functions to keep dissociated any other self-states that would feel too disjunctive with the present configuration. Well, that seems saying in proper speak what I've just been trying to show you. Anything which would be too painful, anything which would be too problematic, this ability to dissociate, this ability to just push it away, I'll keep it there. And the I will stick to whatever self-state is left. Doesn't need to engage with that. Doesn't need to make that part of the world. Let's take this last one. Yeah, he's talking about actual analysis here for a moment, but it applies outside the therapy room. This is you and me going about our everyday lives. In other words, when we're working with dissociation, this ability to push away, my caveat is to be wary of thinking of the therapeutic process as if it were a progressive integration, a bringing together of many into one. And again, this is the image of what we're trying to do, that we fall back on again and again. Oh, I'm trying to bring everything together as one, make a whole out of it in that sense. Rather, back to Bromberg, I contend that optimal mental functioning consists in our being able to access disparate self-states, and that treatment ought to provide a context for facilitating internal communication between these states as a repetitive process. Which actually is a fascinating and very different idea, and totally fits with this kind of Buddhist idea of the self. I've got these separate me's, these separate moments of me. They all have different qualities. They all have somewhat different personalities. They keep different things away. They invite different things in. And really, what I need is the ability to move. Or in terms of our, metaphor, our image of the theatre, I need to bring you forward to speak and to gesture. And then ask you to go back and bring you forward. Say their piece, to move through my different self-states. And there's a unity in separation, a unity in differentiation. And the fascinating thing is that the way this actually happens and works well when it works is through relationship. It works when our minds, your mind and my mind, we're on the same page. We're singing the same tune. Actually, we might be sharing a joke. We might both see something and go, yeah. Moments. And interestingly, Bromberg is big on this. As I've often said, and I'll say it again, I'm no great shakes when it comes to brain biology or anything. But this whole kind of right brain, left brain, that this kind of sharing of self-states, and Bromberg is quite serious about this, that, we come to share self-states. This is the real basis of communication between us. And where this sharing is significant, we change each other and we change the configuration of each other. So this sharing of self-states is largely not to do with conceptual things, not to do with meanings, specific ideas. In one sense, it's much more to do with play, that we learn to play together in very specific ways. And that by doing so, we can begin to bring about change. Obviously, that's very structured in the case of a psychoanalyst. But that's what we do with each other all the time as workmates, parents and children, partners. It's what relationship is when it's working. It's exciting, it's wild, it's life. And so the problem comes when this gets stuck. And the reason for Bromberg that this gets stuck, that we stay within this very narrow range of very protected, limited self-states where too many things are kept out, and we aren't free to move between these self-states, is basically through trauma in its many forms, whether that's, some cataclysmic event or whether it's just growing up in the way that we did and being the parents we had and having the school friends, and the usual kind of deal. But that what we can do for each other is begin to offer each other the possibility of this more fluid relationship between the whole of us. Yeah, so if we think about movement and this free movement towards self-states, another metaphor, another image for you. In a sense, the effect of trauma is like forming scab or scar tissue. It just means we can't move without pain, and we're not going to go there, and we're not going to make that movement because it hurts, it's difficult, and, I just don't want to go there. So self-states obviously have relationship to what we think of as roles. Now I'm a parent, now I'm a child, now I'm a teacher, now I'm a student, now I'm this, now I'm that. But self-states aren't roles because within one role we know the rules. And our self-states come, go, flicker. I might draw on many different self-states within the same hour, within the same part of what I'm doing in that particular role. Self-states are much more difficult to pin down. They don't really have names unless I choose to give them to them. But they're always whole. They always feel like me. They always come as a whole self, not just a name or an image or a cipher. So it turns out that this me thing, this self, when it's working well, is not looking to find the permanent, the unchanging. It's actually trying to be as flexible, as impermanent, as the situation demands, and as the next impermanent moment the situation demands. And so actually, it's really curious because in this sense, our separation is not separate. Bromberg talks about this, and it was the title of his first book, Standing in the Spaces. What we need to do is to be able to become, and I think Zazen is actually a marvellous opportunity for this. Bromberg doesn't talk about this at all, but I don't think it's illegitimate to. Begin to see these separate self-states, which normally just feel like me. I don't notice any difference between them, but this process of disconnecting, connecting, coming back differently. Zazen, the work that we do in the precepts, this is all offering us possibilities to begin to stand in the spaces between self-states. And the really weird conclusion is that to be whole, to be entire, to be the bigger me, I literally need to embrace my separation, the different me's, not to try and bring them all together into one, to allow them, their difference, and be whole at that level. Yeah, standing in the spaces, embracing my impermanence, embracing my separation, bringing wholeness at that level.